Grant Robertson.
Mr. Speaker, I can see the National Party's problem today, which is that, for today, the problem is this: there's no Plan B. That's the problem. So Plan A, sign the TPPA. Plan B, refer to Plan A. That was as good as it got for the National Party. That's as good as it got for the National Party when it came to something approximating an economic plan or an economic strategy. So what I had been hoping, Mr. Speaker, that I would hear from National Party members today when they got up and spoke on this bill was to say, Plan A has failed, and their leader, John Key, went on the radio this morning and said, it's over, it's dead. So I was hoping what we would hear today is the National Party members get up and say, well, the Trans-Pacific Partnership's not going to happen, so here's what we're going to do to support those small businesses and those exporters that Mr. Mitchell just talked about. But instead, the National Party continues to live in a state of denial. So once and for all, for the National Party's benefit, it's over, it's finished, move on, find something new. And that's the truth. It's not a matter of political cynicism, Mr. Mitchell, it's the reality. And what New Zealanders need is a government that actually gets alongside them and doesn't put its faith in one single thing, put its eggs or its cows or whatever it is into one basket, because that's what, unfortunately, the national government has done when it comes to the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. Mr. Speaker, in earlier stages of this bill, we raised time and again with the government the futility of what they were doing. The fact that we even have a bill that's got a commencement date for something that will now never happen. So this legislation will pass and then it'll sit there in suspended animation forever. That is some kind of legacy of the National Party's trade policy of the last couple of years. I said in earlier readings, Mr. Speaker, I do want to give Mr. Macleay this piece of credit. Once he became the Trade Minister, he worked out that he actually needed to go and engage with New Zealanders about trade. And if that's one thing I would have liked to have heard a bit more about from the National Party today, is that they will now take the opportunity of the collapse of the TPPA to go back to the basics of what New Zealanders are looking for when it comes to trade policy. And I think what New Zealanders are looking for when it comes to trade policy is a government that's out there looking for opportunities for our businesses and our exporters to sell their goods and services to the world. That's what we've done historically as New Zealanders from the very beginning, from the very first peoples who came here, who were trading people, through all the way to the governments of the last century or so, and particularly to the fifth Labor government that made such great strides with things like the China Free Trade Deal. That's what we've been, a trading nation. But we do it on the basis of principles. We do it on the basis of fairness. We do it on the basis that this Parliament has a sovereign right to decide how we make regulations in this country, how we decide who it is who gets the privilege of being able to buy a house in this country. It's this Parliament's job to do that. Let's set those principles. Let's make sure we sign trade agreements that are good for the environment, that have good labour standards, that protect the Treaty of Waitangi. Let's go right back to the beginning and go back to New Zealanders and engage in getting a social contract and a social mandate around trade. That's what we now need to do, because trade matters, Mr. Speaker. Trade agreements matter. But getting sucked into an agreement like the TPPA that ended up being one that actually perpetuates all of the things that are wrong with the economic model in the world today. We actually need an economic model that values the building wealth from the ground up, that actually says all those small businesses, and bear in mind only about a third of small businesses in the MYOB survey actually supported the TPPA because they could see the risks. So let's get alongside those small businesses and build an economic model that's about decent work and decent jobs. That's about jobs that are going to be sustainable into the future, that aren't reliant upon these kinds of agreements that go so much further than what an ordinary trade agreement is. This wasn't just a trade agreement, and New Zealanders saw through the government's rhetoric in that regard. Because what New Zealanders saw was an agreement where they felt like they didn't matter, that the interests of corporations in other countries were somehow more important than the interests of the citizens inside New Zealand. That's what New Zealanders felt when they saw the TPPA. That's why they rejected it in such big numbers. But the government didn't want to listen. And obviously we've seen across the world in terms of the results of the US election, what happens when the feelings of anxiety and dispossession in the economy get exploited. Well, I have no interest in that. What I want us to do as a House is recognise the people who haven't benefited from globalisation, recognise the people who feel that there isn't a future for them in these kinds of agreements, and work with those people to say there's a better way. We can build up trading relationships, we can build up agreements that don't exploit people, that don't take away rights from Parliament, but actually empower countries to trade with one another. I read during the US election, Mr. Speaker, a passage from somebody who was talking about what was wrong with the approach that Mr. Trump was taking to these issues. And that person said that there was an exploitation or an imposition of the belief that if I put out my neighbour's candle, somehow mine will burn brighter. That's the exploitation here. The feeling of anxiety and dispossession is not solved by saying to somebody else, I don't want you to succeed. It's solved by us working together to say, there's a different economic model. There's a different way of doing this. And there's Judith Collins. There's Judith Collins, a person who consistently in this House comes in here to tell us all the things that we on this side of the House are doing wrong. Well, I challenge Judith Collins to get up on her hind legs and tell this House what the new plan is. No, nothing. There's no plan on that side of the House. There is no plan on that side of the House for what we do next.
Order. Order. Member will resume his seat. The Honourable Judith Collins has been a member of this House for some time, and she knows that she must not address the Speaker in that manner.
Well, I apologise, Mr. Speaker, but I would say to that member he shouldn't talk about me as though I'm a dog on hind legs. He should apologise.
No, I haven't finished dealing with the member yet. The member will now withdraw without any reservation the comment that she made.
Withdraw.
Grant Robertson.
Mr. Speaker, Judith Collins and the National Party need to finally front up to New Zealanders and say, what's the economic plan that's actually going to lift the incomes and the spirits and the opportunities of all New Zealanders? Not just the very few at the top, not just those that the National Party cares about, but all New Zealanders. That's what a good quality agreement would do. A good quality trade agreement, Mr. Speaker, wouldn't be about scaring New Zealanders. It wouldn't be about telling New Zealanders that their dream of owning a home is expendable to the national government. It wouldn't be about telling New Zealanders that the government doesn't even know what the cost of medicines might be in the future. It wouldn't be about extending out copyright provisions that will actually prevent innovation inside New Zealand. Those are not the things that would be in a trade agreement that would be being brought to this House that was about lifting the incomes of ordinary working New Zealanders. Mr. Speaker, the government has completely failed over the last 2 years to actually bring New Zealanders with them on this agreement. A lot of that the fault for that falls at the feet of the previous Trade Minister, Tim Grosser, who decided that he knew everything. And his approach was symptomatic of an out-of-touch and arrogant government that didn't believe that it needed to listen to New Zealanders' concerns, that didn't believe it needed to listen to small businesses' concerns. Now Minister Todd McClay has an opportunity, Mr. Speaker. He has an opportunity to reset the clock on trade, to reset the bipartisan approach to trade, which we would welcome if it's based on those core principles and values of New Zealanders, that we will have agreements that allow us to trade fairly, that protect the environment, that support labour rights, that support the Treaty of Waitangi, and are based on a new economy where everybody gets a fair go. If the government brings those kinds of agreements to this House that protect our sovereignty, that make sure that as New Zealanders we can make the laws that we want, then we can have a bipartisan agreement on trade. That's the opportunity that the government currently has, and I hope they take that up. We haven't heard that from them today. We've heard the cynical, nasty comments from people like Judith Collins. Let's hear from the National Party members the actual plan for the economy of the future where the whole of Parliament can support it. Today is a tragic, tragic day for the National Party because they've missed the beat, Mr. Speaker. They've missed the point of the last 24 hours. They haven't come up with a new plan. They're flat-footed. They're lost. They've missed an opportunity, Mr. Speaker, and unfortunately that's the legacy of their economic policy.
The Honourable